Genesis, as the opening book of the Bible, is often seen as the starting point for understanding creation, humanity's origins, and the divine order established by God. However, what if Genesis is merely the beginning of a much deeper and more complex story? One that spans cosmic realms and celestial battles that shape the universe itself? According to apocryphal books like Enoch and Jubilees, the creation story found in Genesis does not exist in isolation. It is part of a grand cosmic narrative involving divine beings, rebellion, and spiritual warfare that extend far beyond the confines of the earthly realm. In Genesis 1:1, we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." This verse marks the start of God's creative work, but the banned books suggest that this creation was not born from divine silence or peaceful harmony. Instead, it emerged in the wake of a profound celestial conflict. The Book of Enoch pulls back the curtain on events before Genesis, revealing a rebellion in the heavens led by the angelic beings known as the Watchers. These angels, drawn by forbidden desires, defied God's authority and descended to earth, beginning a cosmic clash that set the stage for the creation of the world as we know it. Far from being a simple act of creation, the Bible's Genesis account can be understood as a decisive response to the chaos caused by this rebellion. Before God spoke light into existence, the heavens were said to be in turmoil. The rebellion of Lucifer and the fallen angels had cast a shadow over the cosmos, and the earth was formless and void, as described in Genesis 1:2. Some banned texts suggest that this description refers to the remnants of a celestial war, a darkness left behind by the rebellion. God's act of creation, then, was not only about bringing order from chaos, but also a declaration of his sovereignty over the forces of darkness. When God spoke, "Let there be light," he was not merely creating a physical phenomenon, but pushing back against the chaos and rebellion that had threatened the divine order. The Book of Jubilees adds another layer to this narrative, suggesting that the creation of humanity was not only an act of divine love, but also a strategic move to reclaim dominion over a world that had been scarred by celestial defiance. Humanity was created to reflect God's image and to stand as witnesses to his glory, even in the midst of rebellion. To humanity, God's ultimate plan of redemption would unfold, with the promise of restoration from the cosmic rebellion that had so deeply affected creation. In the context of these ancient texts, Genesis becomes much more than a simple account of creation. It is the beginning of a profound cosmic drama, a divine counterstroke against rebellion, chaos, and darkness, with God's light and order triumphing over the forces that sought to disrupt his perfect creation. The Genesis we know today, when understood alongside the banned books, opens up a far more layered and complex narrative of the battle between good and evil, one that still echoes throughout history. This story of the Nephilim in Genesis 6:1-4 has long intrigued biblical scholars and readers alike. But what if there's more to these mysterious giants than what's immediately apparent in the Bible? The Nephilim, often described simply as heroes of old and men of renown, are briefly mentioned in Genesis, but apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch and Jubilees reveal a far more complex and unsettling picture. These texts suggest that the Nephilim were not just mighty warriors or mythical figures. They were the product of angelic rebellion, the offspring of fallen angels known as the Watchers, who defied God by descending to earth and taking human wives. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers, originally tasked with watching over humanity, fall victim to lust and corruption. They leave their heavenly posts and descend to earth, where they take human women as their wives, producing offspring that were unlike anything the world had ever seen, giants of immense strength and power. The Nephilim were born from these forbidden unions, and their existence is seen as the ultimate defilement of creation. Their influence on Earth was catastrophic, for the giants did not simply live among humans, but they corrupted the world with violence and sin. They taught humanity forbidden knowledge, arts like astrology, weapon making, and sorcery that twisted the divine order. The presence of these beings wasn't just a random act of rebellion, but had a profound impact on creation. The Nephilim, while mighty, were also a symbol of divine defiance, a corruption that tainted God's perfect plan for the earth and humanity. The Book of Enoch expands upon this theme by revealing that their actions were not only destructive in a physical sense, but also led to the spread of deep spiritual corruption. As these giants wreaked havoc, the world began to fall further into chaos, a reflection of the spiritual breakdown caused by the fallen angels. In response, God decided to cleanse the earth of their influence. The flood, which Genesis records as a divine judgment against humanity's sin, was also aimed at eradicating the corruption brought on by the Nephilim and the fallen angels. This act of judgment was not just about human wickedness, but also about dealing with the celestial rebellion that had so deeply infected creation. The flood was a cosmic reset, washing away the giants and their corrupting influence, and it served as a reminder that no being, no matter how powerful, is beyond God's judgment. The story of the Nephilim, when explored through the lens of the apocryphal texts, challenges our understanding of Genesis and gives us a deeper insight into the battle between divine order and rebellious chaos. These giants were not just a strange aside in the Genesis account. They were part of a larger cosmic war, one that reflects the ongoing struggle between light and darkness, good and evil, that continues to shape the spiritual landscape of the world today. The creation of humanity in Genesis is often viewed simply as an act of divine love, but what if it was also part of a larger, more strategic plan to restore balance and glory in a world tainted by rebellion? The Bible presents humanity's creation in Genesis 1:26-27, where God says, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness," and humanity is created to reflect His divine image. This idea of humans reflecting God's image is central to the Genesis narrative, but the apocryphal books like Jubilees and Enoch suggest that humanity's creation had a deeper purpose, one that went beyond stewardship of the earth. According to these texts, humanity was not just created to care for the world, but was specifically chosen to serve as a countermeasure to the cosmic rebellion that had previously shaken the heavens. The creation of humanity was, in part, a response to the rebellion of the angels, particularly the Watchers who had abandoned their posts to corrupt creation. In the midst of this chaos, God created humans to serve as witnesses of His glory, standing as a living testament to His sovereignty, even amidst the forces of rebellion. The Book of Jubilees, expanding on Genesis, presents the idea that humanity was designed to display God's justice and grace. The creation of Adam and Eve was not merely about populating the earth, but about re-establishing order in a world that had been ravaged by celestial disobedience. Humanity was to reflect God's image in the physical realm, showcasing His authority and purpose in contrast to the chaos brought about by the fallen angels. In this view, humans were not passive participants in creation, but active agents in God's plan to reclaim dominion over the corrupted cosmos. The Book of Enoch further emphasizes this role, suggesting that the fallen angels watched with envy as God created humanity. These rebellious beings, who had forsaken their heavenly positions, were unable to experience the unique bond between God and humans, and their jealousy led them to further acts of corruption. The Watchers, in their bitterness, imparted forbidden knowledge to humanity, teaching them astrology, weaponry, and sorcery arts that ultimately led to humanity's downfall. Yet, through the creation of humans, God demonstrated his intent to combat the corruption introduced by these rebellious beings. In light of these interpretations, the creation of humanity appears not only as a loving act of divine creation, but as a strategic decision to show God's glory in a world filled with chaos. Genesis teaches that humanity was created to reflect God's image and fulfill his purpose on earth. But the banned books deepen this by showing that humanity's role was always tied to a cosmic struggle between good and evil. In this way, the creation of humans wasn't just a passive event. It was a crucial part of the divine battle to reclaim dominion and restore the heavenly order. Through humanity, God's light would continue to shine in a world scarred by rebellion. The fall of Lucifer and the rebellion of the angels is one of the most profound and mysterious events in both biblical and apocryphal texts. In Genesis, we are introduced to the cosmic battle between light and darkness, though much of the story remains veiled. However, when we look beyond the Bible into apocryphal books like Enoch and Jubilees, we gain a fuller understanding of the spiritual drama that unfolded before the creation of humanity. These texts tell us that Lucifer, once the most radiant of all angels, was not always the embodiment of evil that we later see in Scripture. Instead, he was originally created as a magnificent being, one who reflected God's glory. But Lucifer's beauty and wisdom ultimately became his downfall. According to the Book of Enoch, Lucifer's pride led to his rebellion against God. He grew envious of God's supremacy and desired to claim that authority for himself. This pride, fueled by a desire for autonomy and power, sparked a celestial uprising. Lucifer and a third of the angels who followed him, known as the fallen angels or watchers, were cast out of heaven for their defiance. This rebellion wasn't just an isolated act of disobedience. It was a cosmic event that shattered the peace of the heavenly realms and set the stage for chaos to spread throughout creation. The fallout from the celestial war would have far-reaching consequences, not only affecting the angels who fell, but also the very fabric of creation itself. The Book of Enoch describes how these fallen angels, now filled with bitterness and regret, descended to earth, corrupting humanity. These rebellious beings, once guardians of divine order, turned against God's design, teaching humanity forbidden knowledge and imparting dark arts. They taught humanity astrology, weaponry, sorcery, and other forbidden secrets, further tainting God's creation. This defilement set into motion a series of events that ultimately led to the Great Flood, a judgment that would cleanse the earth of the corruption brought on by these fallen angels and their offspring, the Nephilim. While the rebellion of Lucifer and the Watchers is often seen as the origin of evil and spiritual warfare, it also underscores a deeper truth: the battle for free will and the consequences of pride. The fall of Lucifer wasn't merely an act of rebellion against God's authority, but a demonstration of the choice to reject divine order for personal gain. The Watchers' descent into corruption and their subsequent punishment serve as a warning of the dangers of pride and disobedience. In granting angels and humanity free will, God allowed the possibility for rebellion, but also the opportunity for loyalty and devotion. The rebellion of Lucifer and the Watchers thus highlights the eternal struggle between good and evil, light and darkness, and reminds us of the crucial role of choice in God's creation. The flood in Genesis is one of the most significant events in the Bible, marking a moment of divine judgment that cleansed the earth of its corruption. While the Bible presents the flood as God's response to the wickedness of humanity, the apocryphal texts, such as the Book of Enoch and Jubilees, offer a more expansive understanding of this momentous event. According to these ancient writings, the flood was not just a judgment against human sin, but also a cosmic response to the rebellion of celestial beings. The fallen angels known as the Watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim. In the book of Enoch, we learn that the Watchers, who were originally tasked with watching over humanity, abandoned their posts and descended to earth. These angels, driven by forbidden desires, took human wives and fathered the Nephilim, giants of immense strength and power. Their presence on earth didn't just lead to violence and chaos, it also corrupted the very fabric of creation. The Nephilim, powerful and destructive, ravaged the earth, teaching humanity forbidden knowledge such as sorcery, astrology, and weaponry. The corruption they brought spread far beyond the realm of human beings, tainting the earth and creating an environment where wickedness and chaos flourished. In this context, the flood emerges as not only a response to the wickedness of humanity, but also a divine reset, a cosmic cleansing designed to eradicate the corruption caused by the rebellion of the Watchers and their monstrous offspring. The book of Enoch describes how the Nephilim and their fathers, the fallen angels, had become so entrenched in their defiance of God that the very earth itself cried out for judgment. God, seeing the devastation caused by these beings, decided to flood the earth, wiping away the corruption that had spread and starting anew. The flood wasn't just an act of punishment against human sin, it was a necessary step in restoring order to the cosmos, removing the dark influence of the fallen angels and their monstrous children. The judgment of the flood was a decisive moment in God's plan to reassert his sovereignty and to purify his creation from the stain of rebellion. The flood didn't just destroy the Nephilim and the wickedness of humanity. It served as a warning to the spiritual realm that no being, regardless of their power, could escape God's judgment. Yet even in this judgment, there was mercy. Noah, described as a righteous man, found favor in God's eyes, and through him, the human race was preserved. This was not only a second chance for humanity, but also a reminder of God's covenant of mercy and his determination to restore creation. When viewed through the lens of the apocryphal texts, the flood becomes a more complex event, one that represents both judgment and hope. It was a divine response to the cosmic war between good and evil, a war that had reached its breaking point. The flood was a necessary act of cleansing, and through it, God laid the foundation for his plan of redemption, one that would unfold throughout the rest of Scripture and ultimately bring about the restoration of all creation. The Tower of Babel in Genesis 11:1-9 is one of the most iconic stories in the Bible, illustrating humanity's attempt to defy God's will and seek independence through their own power. The account in Genesis tells us that the people, united by a single language, decided to build a city and a tower that would reach to the heavens. Their aim was to make a name for themselves and prevent being scattered across the earth. However, what if this story goes beyond mere human ambition? What if the construction of the Tower of Babel was not just about architecture or pride, but was a cosmic rebellion, a deliberate act of defiance against God's authority that had far-reaching spiritual consequences? According to apocryphal texts, like the Book of Jubilees, there is more to the story of Babel than meets the eye. These texts suggest that the Tower of Babel was not only a physical structure, but also a spiritual stronghold. The construction of the tower was an attempt to challenge God's sovereignty in the heavens and on earth. Nimrod, the king who led the people in this endeavor, is portrayed as a figure consumed by his own power and ambition. The Book of Jubilees paints Nimrod as a mighty ruler who sought to rally all of humanity under his rule, rejecting God's divine order in favor of his own. The tower itself became a symbol of human rebellion, a way to reach the heavens and assert control over the spiritual realm. In this view, the Tower of Babel was more than an expression of human pride. It was an act of spiritual defiance, an attempt to control and manipulate the divine. Some Ancient Jewish traditions and texts suggest that the people were not just building a structure, but also seeking to open a portal to the divine realm. They wanted to transcend their human limitations and gain power over the heavenly realm. This act of spiritual arrogance, however, did not go unnoticed by God. In response, God descended to see the tower and immediately intervened. He confused their language, causing the people to no longer understand one another, and scattered them across the earth. This intervention was not only a judgment, but a divine act of mercy, as it prevented the people from succeeding in their attempt to establish a rebellious kingdom. The scattering of humanity and the confusion of languages was not just about preventing a construction project, it was about preserving the cosmic order. The Book of Jubilees and other apocryphal texts add depth to the Genesis narrative by revealing that God's actions at Babel were designed to restore balance and prevent humanity from uniting under a common cause that defied divine authority. The act of scattering, which could be seen as a punishment, was also an act of grace, limiting the extent of human rebellion. In this light, the Tower of Babel represents much more than a tale of human pride. It is a profound spiritual conflict, one that echoes through human history. The desire to assert control over the divine, to elevate oneself to the status of God, is a temptation that persists even today. The Tower of Babel serves as a reminder of the dangers of seeking independence from God, of attempting to build a kingdom based on rebellion rather than humility. It also points to the importance of unity in obedience to God's will, rather than unity through self-willed defiance. The covenant between God and Abraham is one of the most foundational moments in the Bible, establishing a promise that would shape not only the destiny of Abraham's descendants, but the entire course of human history. Genesis 12:1-3 introduces us to God's call to Abram, telling him to leave his homeland and family to go to a land God would show him. In return, God promises to make him into a great nation, bless him, and make his name great. But what if this covenant with Abraham was more than just about land or descendants? What if it was a cosmic agreement, a divine contract bridging heaven and earth, with Abraham serving as a mediator between the two? When we look at the apocryphal texts such as the Apocalypse of Abraham, we gain a deeper understanding of this covenant. These writings suggest that Abraham's journey was not just a personal one, but a part of God's larger plan to restore and redeem creation. The Apocalypse of Abraham presents a vision of Abraham not only as a man of faith, but as someone caught in a cosmic battle between good and evil, with divine beings intervening in his life. In this perspective, Abraham's obedience to God's call was not only a personal step of faith, it was part of a much larger cosmic drama that involved the unseen spiritual realm. In these texts, Abraham's covenant with God is depicted as a momentous event that echoes in the heavens. When God made his promise to Abraham, it was not just about blessing him with descendants, but also about restoring humanity's broken relationship with the Creator. Through Abraham, God would fulfill his promise to bring salvation to the world. The Apocalypse of Abraham goes even further, describing a moment when Abraham ascends into the divine realms and witnesses the spiritual forces at work in the world. This divine vision underscores that Abraham's calling was not just about earthly blessings, but about his role in God's eternal plan of redemption. The covenant also brings to light the deeper significance of Abraham's faith. While Genesis highlights his trust in God's promises, apocryphal texts reveal that this trust was not just about waiting for a promised land. It was about standing firm in the face of spiritual warfare. Abraham was called to be a witness to God's plan, and his faith became the foundation of a larger narrative that would span generations. The covenant wasn't simply an isolated promise to one man. It was the beginning of a chain of events that would lead to the fulfillment of God's ultimate plan for all creation. Abraham's obedience was crucial in this cosmic contract. His journey to Canaan, his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac, and his unyielding trust in God all played a part in the larger story of redemption. This covenant with Abraham, then, was not just about land or descendants. It was the establishment of a spiritual bridge, a connection between the divine and the human that would shape the future of Israel and ultimately lead to the arrival of the Messiah, the fulfillment of God's promises. Through Abraham's faith, God's plan to bless all nations was set in motion, a promise that would echo through the generations and culminate in the salvation of the world. The prophetic nature of Genesis becomes even clearer when we look at the blessings and visions given to Jacob before his death. In Genesis 49, Jacob blesses his 12 sons, each one receiving a prophetic word that outlines their future and their role in the broader story of God's plan for Israel. These blessings, often seen as historical reflections on the tribes of Israel, also carry deep prophetic significance that stretches far beyond the immediate context. When we look at these prophecies through the lens of apocryphal books, like the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, they take on an even broader scope, revealing not just the future of Israel, but the eventual fulfillment of God's grand design for humanity through the coming Messiah. One of the most profound prophecies Jacob gives is to Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Genesis 49:10. This verse hints at a ruler who will rise from Judah's line, someone who will unite the nations under God's rule and bring peace to the earth. The apocryphal texts expand on this, showing that these prophecies are not just about a king in the immediate future, but point to a far greater fulfillment in the coming of Jesus Christ, the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises to Israel and the world. When we consider the broader prophetic context of Genesis, it becomes clear that this isn't just the story of individual families, but a divine map of redemption woven into the very fabric of creation. Jacob's blessings are more than declarations for his sons. They are echoes of God's eternal plan, a plan that spans from the beginning of time and stretches to the end of days. The promises made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants form the foundation of the story of salvation that continues to unfold today. Each blessing, each prophecy, carries the weight of divine intention, a plan that has always been aimed at restoring creation and bringing humanity back into relationship with God. The story of Genesis, when understood in this way, is not just an ancient tale, but a living narrative that speaks to us today. It reminds us that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, part of a divine story that began long before we were born and will continue long after we are gone. Just as Jacob's blessings had far-reaching implications for his descendants, so too does God's promise to each of us carry eternal significance. The choices we make, the faith we hold, and the way we respond to God's calling are all part of the ongoing story of redemption. In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain, Genesis invites us to see the bigger picture, one where God is at work, fulfilling his promises and bringing all things into alignment with his will. It challenges us to trust that no matter how dark the world may seem, God's plan is moving forward, and we each have a role to play in it. Just as God remained faithful to his promises in Genesis, he continues to be faithful today, guiding us toward the ultimate fulfillment of his kingdom.